Okay, here's my starter. I fed it yesterday and put it in the fridge, and then this morning early I took it out and I put this little, when I fed it initially, I put this little rubber band around it. You can see it's risen up some, and I think when I take the lid off it's going to rise up even more. It gets kind of foamy. But when they say it should be active and bubbly, that's kind of what they're talking about. You can see all the bubbles and stuff in there. If you let it sit, after it sits for a while, it will get a kind of a brownish liquid on it that's sort of like alcohol, I guess, but they call it hooch. And you normally pour that off. I've always done that as they recommend. But so I'm going to make a double batch using this and kind of show you how that goes using the recipe that I usually use. This is the recipe I use. It's pretty simple, but it's just the bubbly active starter is what you're looking at here. Although my starter is a little bit thin, a little bit thinner than what I like. It's more like pancake batter than yogurt, but that's okay. So about 150 grams of that, and it is important to, well, I've been using a scale to weigh it, and that's usually the best way to go. And then between 250 and 300 grams of warm water. I used to use filtered water. I don't worry about that anymore. And then 25 grams of olive oil, 500 grams of bread flour. Bread flour seems to work a lot better than all-purpose flour, so it's a little more expensive, but it's worth it. And then 10 grams of fine sea salt. What I do is I take kosher salt and I grind it up in my mortar and pestle, so it's a little bit finer. And that's it. It's just starter, which is really flour and water, oil, water, and a little bit of salt, and that's about it. Okay, so I've got this bowl sitting up on the scale here. A little bit hard to read it. The bowls. It's a bigger bowl than I usually use, and the recipe says, is it 150 grams starter? So that means I'm going to use 300 grams since I'm making a double batch today. $2.99, 300 exactly. Usually right after I do that, I will go ahead and renew the starter. I'll throw about a quarter cup, half cup or so of water and about that much flour, all-purpose flour in there, and then stick it in the fridge until next time. Somewhere between 1 and 2 weeks is usually the most that you want to go between feedings when it's in the fridge. Okay, now I got the starter, the 300 grams of starter. I'm going to put, I guess, what is it, 50 grams? 50 grams of olive oil. Should be about 4 tablespoons. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, maybe a little bit more. 44, 45, 48, 49.2. I'm going to quit while I'm ahead. 49.4. And then, let's see, reset this. And then the water, it says in the instructions you can increase the water if you want it to be a little moister and pliable, up to 300 to 325, so that would be 600 to 650. I usually stick with what they say, so about 500. So I stuck this in the microwave to get it warm, not hot. So I'm looking for about 500 grams, which is a little over 2 cups. 466, 470, 480, 490, 506. That's good. And now I'm going to use my trusty Swedish whisk, which is pretty handy because it's easy to clean. But a big fork works too. Don't have to get too snazzy. Just kind of mix everything up a little bit there. So once you whisk that up a little bit, you can put in the flour. 500 grams, which is about a pound. So this is going to be about 1 kilogram, which is a little over 2 pounds. This is the biggest batch I've made, so it's pretty exciting. With all the inflation and thing going on with Ukraine and disruptions to the wheat, shipments around the world, flour is probably going to be more expensive. So $9.96, 1,000. All right. I have tried using half. I don't think I have enough for another batch. I'm going to have to get some more bread flour. I have tried using all-purpose flour instead, and it's definitely not the same. I've also tried, I've had a couple times where I've almost run out of, I didn't have enough bread flour, so then I put some all-purpose flour in too. I didn't notice a huge difference with that, but it was, I don't think it was quite as good. So when they tell you bread flour is best, they're telling you the truth. All right, now I'll throw the salt in, and that's it for the ingredients. Now it's just a matter of mixing and waiting. So this this whisk is good for mixing this stuff up here. So let's see. Glad I used this big bowl now. The recipe states you just kind of mix everything together. If you want to be really adventurous, you could just get in there with your hands. I don't usually do it at this stage. It's a little too messy, but you get to a point where it's, they say shaggy, which is kind of a vague term, but it sort of makes sense. Just try to make sure there's no big dry clumps of flour. That's pretty, I'd say that's pretty shaggy. It's a little sticky still, but yeah, cleaning this whisk off with the brush in the sink works really well. Okay, so that's sort of the definition of a shaggy dough there. A little closer look. And what I'd like to do is take some saran wrap and I'm such an old weirdo that I reuse the stuff. So once I use it, I just kind of fold it up and stick it off to the side so I can use it again. Put that over the... Well, usually the bowl I use, it fits. It fits completely. This one, not so much. Well, maybe I can pull this off. Just want to... It's not quite going to cover it completely. Oh, so close. That's alright, I'll try to do that. And then got this other piece I can put here. And then my trusty rubber band. Put your trusty rubber band around it to hold it in place. And then I stick it in the oven with the light on for, let's see, the instructions say this is called autolyzing. It says let it rest for 30 minutes up to 1 hour if preferred. So that it helps to kind of get going as far as the yeast or the growth of the stuff in there that gives it its taste. It says you can also use a clean, very damp kitchen towel. That sounds like madness to me. So I'll put this in the oven for, oh, I think I'll go 45 minutes. I'll go in between. Well, 45 minutes has elapsed. Doesn't look a whole lot different. At this point, we should talk about kneading. The recipe calls for very little of that. At this point, I think the recipe, the traditional or the normal way to make it is to do some stretch and fold. And there's websites and there's videos that will show you how to do that. Basically, you just take a piece of the dough, you kind of pull it out and then fold it back in, and you do that and you go around and you do that a few times. Then you let it sit. But as the recipe, this recipe states, there's not a whole lot of kneading required. I've seen some videos where they talk about kneading it for a long time until you get this window pane effect where you can stretch it and you can almost see through it. It gets really really smooth, and I've tried kneading it a lot and it didn't seem to make a lot of difference. In fact, I think it made the bread a little tougher. So I've kind of gone in between. I've got this little bread scraper here that comes in handy, and what I'll do is I'll just kind of go around and try to pull it away from the bottom and the sides. Be a little bit tough with it. Just kind of start getting it going here. It's probably not a good idea. You can add more flour if it starts to get real sticky. I usually try to avoid that because it'll, like the Irish guy said, it'll eat up all the flour you give it. And so once you get it so it's a little bit. But yeah, the stretch and fold is basically you pull it out and push it in like that. Just go all around and do that. You can also just get your fingers wet. That'll dip them in the water a little bit and get them wet, and it won't stick to your fingers, at least until the water gets absorbed off of there. This feels weird because it's a much bigger batch than I'm used to dealing with. But you can play with this as long as you want, really. I usually after a minute or two I've had my fill. And let's see, right now it's 2:40 in the afternoon. I usually do this a little bit later, but once I get it so it's feeling the way I want it to feel, which I'm getting close now. You can see the difference now as far as being shaggy. It doesn't really look as, doesn't have that kind of dryness to it that it did before. Yeah. It was kind of fun. Yeah. I see a lot of the guys I've watched do this. They'll sprinkle flour on top of it so it doesn't get sticky. I don't really see a need for that, because I'm going to stick it in the fridge now until, well, I guess it's going to be in there quite a while. I usually get it out when I first wake up in the morning, so that's usually around 5 or so, and then I'll as soon as I'll take it out of the fridge, and then I'll knead it in the bowl, kind of get it started warming up a little bit. And at that point, after it's been in the fridge overnight, it's not sticky at all. It's easy to move around. It doesn't have that tackiness to it. And then I'll put it back in the oven with the light on for a few hours. So now she's all covered up and ready to go back in the fridge for overnight. This is what the bread looks like. You can see there's some kind of air bubbles in there, and it's dense in some places and a little more open in others.
Are you doing the same?
Pretty typical. Okay, so it's been rising for a little over 4 hours. I put it in about 5 this morning. It could probably go a little bit longer, but since it's so hot out, I want to get it done. And you can see it's a little bit shiny, a little sticky. I don't know, I think it'll be alright. We'll see. Like I said, this is a little bigger batch than I usually make. Okay, so at this point, we're gonna dump it. If you can get a bowl scraper or a little piece of plastic and make one, it's kind of helpful. You can already smell it. It's got that slightly stinky smell to it that's kind of attractive, at least to me. Alright.
And then we need to fold in these triangles. So we have 2 solid triangles on the top and the bottom here, and we have 2 smaller triangles on each side. We're going to take these smaller triangles and fold them inward, like that, on both sides, so that we have a triangle.
Okay.
So we have this now, very simple. Take the corners of the triangle and fold them.
So I'll cut this in.
Along the bottom line to the middle, and you can see where the middle is because
About half here.
you can see where your fold is. Do that on both sides.
Still feels a little cool to the touch, so it might have could have been in there for a little bit longer. But
And then we turn it around and do the same thing on the other side.
do one at a time here.
Here it's easy because you can just line up both ends.
Okay, what I usually do is I'll do the stretch and fold thing that they talk about, where you,
And now we
it's a little tacky, but it's not as sticky as it was.
And now
kinda
all we need
pull
to
it
do
out
is these
Stick it in.
small squares that we have
Go all
on
around.
the corner now, we just fold the crease inward instead of how it is now outward. So we just fold it in,
We're gonna.
basically collapsing the square to the inside.
Then they talk about
All four
kind of
of
doing
those.
this. You want to try to shape it into a ball.
Fold it in.
If you put flour down, it's going to make it hard because it'll slip all over on the flour. We have pretty good luck on this Formica.
So now you have a
It seems
house
smaller
and
than usual. I don't know. Maybe it's just me.
so it should look like this.
So once you got it shaped into a nice little ball, you're going to put it in your. I've got this fancy Dutch oven. Parchment paper is essential for me anyway, because when I made it before without the parchment paper, it was a battle to get it out. It was very sticky, stuck to the bottom. So I reuse it too. You can see this one's kind of brown. I'll use it until it starts to get holes and stuff in it. I'll just stick it off to the side. So then you take your nice little ball and you kind of put it back in there and put the lid on, and then you're going to put it back in the oven, well, the oven with the light on to keep it warm for, I don't know, half hour, 45 minutes, something like that. Not as long as before. I'm going to make a second loaf in this. We'll see how that turns out. Okay, so we're done with the second rise. The oven's preheated to I try to jack it up to 450, which is a little hotter than what the recipe says, but that's how I roll. Okay, the last step, which is kind of important before you put it in the oven, is to score the top. So I sharpen my knife good and just kind of make a couple slashes. You can get really creative. There's special devices you can buy for this. I think they call it a lame. A knife seems to work just fine for me, though. That'll help. Otherwise, I've accidentally forgotten to do this before, and it comes out looking kind of strange. It's still edible, but it has bulges, and it's kind of funny. So at this point, you cover it up, put it in the oven at a hot oven, like 450, for 20 minutes. And then you're going to take the lid off, reduce the heat a little bit to maybe, I don't know, 425, 400, and then 40 minutes. But, you know, keep an eye on it, check it yourself, because your oven might be a little bit different. Okay, so it's been 20 minutes with the lid and 40 minutes without at 400 and something, 25 to 450 degrees, and came out okay. It's about what you should shoot for, I guess. Kind of nice and brown. The bottom's nice and crusty. I'm going to put them on a cooling rack for actually probably a couple hours, because it takes quite a while. And then I cut them up into pieces and freeze them, because we don't eat that much bread. It'll last a week or two.